A child learns a language without ever explicitly taught the rules that govern it. And yet, within a few years, a child can produce sentences that they have never heard before. That simple observation creates another extraordinary problem. How does a child know what can and cannot be said? Nobody sits down with a 3-year-old and gives them a complete grammar book. Nobody teaches them with every possible sentences in English. In fact, the number of sentences a speaker can potentially produce is infinite. Yet, the speaker knows that some sentences are grammatical and others are not. That concept is the center of Noam Chomsky's revolution in linguistics. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well. If you are new to my channel, I am Dr. Riya Datto and I make videos on English literature, literary theories and linguistics. If those are something of importance to you and you have explicit interest in them, consider subscribing and follow along. So without further ado, let us begin the lecture. For Chomsky, language is simply not a social habit, a list of vocabulary items or collection of patterns that we imitate. Language is deeply connected with our mind and our cognitive capabilities. Today, I want us to understand Chomsky not just as a linguist, but also as a thinker who changed how we understand language, grammar, creativity, and the human mind. To understand Chomsky, we need to first understand the linguistic environment in which these theories have evolved. Much of the 20th century, American linguistics was influenced by behaviorism. Behaviorist approaches tended to understand language in terms of repetitive behaviors and observable behavior. A child hears the linguistic form, the child tries to imitate it. The form is thus reinforced, and gradually the patterns are established. This pattern treats language acquisition like other behaviors which are learned by acquisition. Chomsky found this particular observation inadequate. His idea is that language is far more complicated and structured than a simple stimulus response can be observed. Let's consider a sentence. The boy who is wearing the blue shirt, which is bought by her mother, is sleeping. The child may have never heard this particular sentence, yet the child can understand it. More importantly, a child can generate another sentences following the grammatical principles of the language. This is what Chomsky calls the creative aspect of language. A competent speaker does not necessarily repeat the sentences that are stored in his memories. They generate new sentences. And this leads us to Chomsky's one of the most important ideas, that is generativity. Now, what does this generative mean? The word generative comes from the idea generate. A grammar is not simply a catalog of sentences. It is a system of rules that allows a speaker to generate unlimited numbers of sentences using the finite amount of grammatical rules. Think about the English vocabulary. Like we have a few set of words, we have finite set of grammatical rules, and from these finite resources we can produce enormous, almost infinite number of sentences. For example, the child laughed loudly. The child who is sitting near the window laughed loudly. The child who was sitting in front of the window laughed loudly because her mother told her a joke. And we can continue embedding structure within the structure. This is not merely memorization. It is a productive system. That productivity is central to Chomsky's conception of language. Let's talk about competence and performance. One of Chomsky's most important distinction is between competence and performance. Competence refers to the speaker's underlying knowledge of their language. It is the implicit grammatical system that makes the speaker understand and produce grammatically correct sentences. Performance refers to the actual use of these grammatical rules and structures in real life language production. And this performance can be messy. We can make mistakes, we can forget words, we can restart the sentence, we can hesitate, we can be distracted. We can say that the boy who was wearing a blue shirt, like the boy who was wearing blue shirt went home. We can say like that. This doesn't mean that we do not know English grammar. Our actual performance can be affected by memory, anxiety, fatigue, attention, or other factors. Chomsky therefore distinguishes between the idealized knowledge of the speaker from the imperfect ways this knowledge is manifested in real life communication. Like one person can speak very good English but can fumble during an interview. This concept is particularly important because it shifts the study from merely observable linguistic behavior towards the mental system of underlying language. Let's talk about the famous problem, the poverty of stimulus. This is the most influential and controversial part of Chomsky's theory. We call it the poverty of stimulus. The question is the linguistic input available to the children sufficient to explain the sophisticated grammatical structure they eventually acquire? Children hear incomplete, ungrammatical, and sometimes imperfect speech. Adults do not consistently correct children's grammar, and yet the children develop remarkably sophisticated grammatical knowledge. For example, let's consider the sentence: Is the boy who is crying hungry? A child has to understand the question is formed from the main clause structure rather than simply removing the first auxiliary verb they encounter. A simplistic rule might produce something like: Is the boy who is crying is hungry? But children do not learn language by consistently memorizing each possible sentences. They appear to acquire the abstract structural principles. This leads to Chomsky's idea that humans possess the innate capabilities of learning language. And this brings us to Chomsky's most famous theory of language, the universal grammar. Possess the innate capability of learning language, and this is referred to as universal grammar. The basic understanding is not that every human language has the simple same grammar. Clearly, they don't, because English has dramatically different grammatical structure than Japanese. Japanese differs from Arabic. Arabic differs from Bengali. Bengali differs from Malayalam. So, universal grammar doesn't mean that all languages have same identical rules. Rather, Chomsky's propositions mean the underlying constraints, the principles that make human languages possible. A human child is beginning not with entirely with a blank slate. Instead, the child possesses an innate cognitive structure that make language acquisition possible. This is why Chomsky's theory is often associated with nativism. Let's talk about language acquisition device. This is another famous term associated with Chomsky, language acquisition device, or LAD. The LAD is often presented in introductory discussions as an innate mechanism through which children can learn language. However, we should be careful here. The popular textbook version can make it sound like Chomsky proposed the actual biological organ inside the head that is labeled as language acquisition device. It's not. The deeper argument is that humans possess an innate cognitive ability specifically suited to language acquisition. The child receives linguistic inputs. The child processes these inputs through an innate cognitive capacity, and the result is the acquisition of that particular language. This is sometimes represented as language, the innate capacity of learning the language, and then acquired grammar. This exact theoretical formulation of this idea changed over Chomsky's career. So we should not treat all versions of LAD and universal grammar as this one unchanged model. Let us now talk about deep structure and surface structure. These concepts have become particularly important in Chomsky's earlier transformational generative grammar. Consider Cheyenne opened the door, and then the door is opened by Cheyenne. These sentences have different surface forms. The first one is active, the second one is passive, but they have a related underlying structural relationship. Chomsky's transformational approach attempted to explain how different surface structures could be generated from the underlying representation through grammatical transformation. The important concept here is transformation. A grammar doesn't specify what exactly sentences look like. It can explain relationships between different structures. So this was a major departure from linguistic approaches, observable sequences. So, what is this transformational generative grammar? The term generative, as we have discussed before, is that the grammar generates sentences, and transformational because grammatical generation can relate to different transformational structures. This theory therefore attempts to explain both how sentences are generated and how different grammatical structures are related. So this becomes enormously influential not only in linguistics but also in philosophy, psychology, cognitive science, and theories of mind. For Chomsky, syntax occupies a particularly interesting position. Why? Because syntax reveals something about the mental organization of language. Consider the sentence: the students who read the book passed the exam. The sentence is constructed with multiple structures. We don't understand the sentence by reading one word after another as isolated units. We understand the relationship between the constituents. For example, the students who read the book functions as a noun phrase. Within that noun phrase, we have relative clause: who read the book. So, language is hierarchical. This is crucial because human language is not simply a linear chain. The students who read the book pass the exam. It has a hierarchical structure. Chomsky's linguistic theory, therefore, emphasizes on structural relationships, not merely on word sequences. Another concept associated with Chomsky is recursion. Recursion allows a structure to contain another structure which is to some extent similar. For example, the sentence, the book I bought, can become the book I bought yesterday. It can also change into the book I bought yesterday because my teacher recommended it, and also so on. So the structure allows the language to expand unlimitedly. So recursion becomes one of the most discussed human characteristics of the language. However, we should remember that recursion is a universal property of every human language debated. Now, the big question: why should the students of English literature care about Chomsky? Because Chomsky fundamentally changed the idea of the relationship between human mind and language. For literary studies, this opened possibilities. When we read a poem, novel, or dramatic text, we are not simply processing the chain of words. We are interpreting structures. We recognize the grammatical patterns. We understand ambiguity. We process metaphor. We infer meanings that are not explicitly stated. And Chomsky's works have established a broader intellectual field in which language can be studied as a cognitive system. Went beyond linguistic studies to literary theory, stylistics, philosophy of language, cognitive science, and narratology. Students often confuse Chomsky with the structuralists like Ferdinand de Saussure. There are connections, but they are not the same theoretical projects. Saussure's structural linguistics emphasizes language as a system of signs and examines relationship within that system. And Chomsky's generative linguistics is much more connected with cognitive capabilities, mental representation, and computational structure. So, very broadly saying, Saussure said that language is the system of signs, and Chomsky said that language is a cognitive generative system. Of course, it is simplification, but it is useful as a first distinction. Chomsky's 1959 review of B.F. Skinner's verbal behavior became famous for challenging behaviorist account of language. Chomsky argued that language cannot be adequately explained through stimulus, response, and reinforcement. This became the part of larger cognitive debates. The focus of inquiry began shifting towards mental representation, internal structures, cognition, information processing, and mechanisms underlying human behavior. Language became evident of the architecture of human mind. That was a profound intellectual shift. Chomsky's works evolved. In later works, the idea of universal grammar was developed through the framework known as the principles of parameter. The basic idea is that human language has a certain fundamental principles while languages differ according to particular parameters. A useful analogy is a set of architectural possibilities. The underlying system provides constraints, while particular language instantiate different options. This framework attempted to explain both linguistic universality and linguistic variation. So let us make a list of the key terms you should remember while studying Chomsky. Number one is generative grammar. Grammar makes it possible to generate unlimited number of sentences. The next term is competence. That is the underlying linguistic knowledge. The next term is performance. That is the actual performance of language. Then comes universal grammar. This is the proposed innate capacity of human mind to acquire language. Next concept is language acquisition device or LAD. This is a traditional term associated with the language acquisition, the innate capacity of language acquisition. Then comes transformational grammar, grammatical theories that explain the relationship of the structures through transformation. Next concept is deep structure and surface structure. Deep structure is the underlying meaning, and surface structure is the way this deep structure is presented. The next concept is recursion. This is the embedding of structures within the structure. The next concept is principles of parameter, shows universal constraints alongside cross-linguistic variation. So let us now return to the child with whom we had begun. Nobody gives the child a complete grammar book. Nobody teaches the child every sentence that he will produce later. And yet, within a remarkably short period, the child becomes capable of understanding and producing an enormous level of languages and sentences. For Chomsky, that fact is not just minor curiosity. It is a clue that language is not something that we just imitate. It is a clue that human mind possesses the extraordinary capacity, and perhaps that is the most important contribution of Chomsky. He moved our attention from language as behavior to language as knowledge. From the sentences we hear today to the system that makes the language possible, that sentence possible, from external performance to internal structure, and ultimately from language itself to one of the oldest questions. What is it about human mind that makes language possible? That is where Chomsky's theory has become more than a theory of grammar. It becomes a theory about what it means to be human. So that was my lecture on the important concepts of Noam Chomsky. If you would like me to discuss some of these concepts in more detail, I would be happy to do that. You just have to let me know by a comment. So thank you for watching, and for more videos like this, keep an eye on my channel. Bye-bye.